Thank you to Prep Denial, Warped Wise Lego Man, and probably others for requesting this episode. Welcome to Conlang Critic, the show that gets facts wrong about your favorite Conlang. I'm Misali, and in this episode we'll be looking at Logban but worse, Loglan. I guess we've really come full circle now, huh? When I started this show, it was because I specifically wanted to talk about how I really don't like Logban. Of course, since then I've learned about a whole lot of languages that are considerably worse, so now Logban doesn't look so bad. Loglan is an engineered language that was created in 1955 by the late Dr. James Cook Brown. Like the other logical languages that came after it, Loglan was designed to be completely structurally unambiguous and was based on the concept of predicate logic, which is a way of analyzing language that's fundamentally different from how people naturally process language. The idea is that if you learn to speak such a language, you'd also start to think differently. The tricky thing is getting people to learn it in the first place. Loglan's consonants are ma, na, ba, da, ga, pa, ta, ka, va, za, ja, fa, tha, sa, sha, cha, ha, wa, la, ya, ra. Okay, so this is piece similar to Logban's inventory with only a couple differences. Wait, first, I never actually made a chart for Logban, so I'll just make one now. So as you can see, Logban removed the dental fricative, which makes sense because it's only like in a 25th of all languages, and added the glottal stop, which doesn't make sense because it's in less than like 9/20ths of all languages. Anyway, back to Loglan. Excluding the rhotic, 7 of these consonants are absent from most languages, which are, in decreasing order of commonality, fa, sha, za, va, ja, cha, and tha. Now, the reason I excluded the rhotic from that list is because this is another example of the whatever rhotic in use. You just pronounce R however you pronounce it in your native language. What do you mean you can't distinguish between R and L? Doesn't every language do that? What are you even talking about, not being able to hear the difference between the rhotic sound and the voice palato-alveolar fricative? Those are completely different sounds. To be fair, the 2 least common consonants here, cha and tha, are both referred to as irregular consonants, and they weren't included in the original version of Loglan, so they don't appear in the core vocabulary. While we're at it, I'd like to point out that Dr. Jim Brown wasn't very good at IPA. The chart you're looking at now has the actual IPA representations of Loglan's consonants, and this chart has them written the way Dr. Jim apparently thought the IPA wrote them. Yes, Jim, palato-alveolar consonants are written with heckin' tone diacritics over alveolar consonants. Good job. Also, this is a bit of a tangent, but the way the sound cha is described implies that he didn't actually know what sound it was. Cha is called, quote, the voice version of H. It is the rough breath of Greek and Russian, and it is the sound spelled with the letter chi in Greek. In fact, our European letter X is derived from chi. X, ka, is also the sound represented by ch in both German and Scottish. Thus, chaikre is pronounced kre, in which the is a very distinct but dry sort of gargle, which will sound very Russian to you when you get it right. From that quote alone, you can infer that X represents the voice glottal fricative, the voice palatal fricative, the voiceless uvular fricative, or even the uvular trill. Oh, and if you want to get technical, Loglan also has a few affricates that are analyzed as clusters. Tsa, za, cha, and ja. Anyways, Loglan's vowels are I, U, U, E, O, A. 7 vowels! There's 7 of them! Not the most I've seen in an international language, but it sure is a lot. Loglan's diphthongs are I, ow, a, oi. Those transcriptions might not be accurate. Again, Dr. Jim Brown wasn't very good at IPA, and none of these diphthongs actually had their IPA pronunciations listed. Instead, he used examples of words in English that have them, which would mean that they're actually pronounced like this. I'm just gonna give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that those are just approximations of how they're pronounced for the benefit of English speakers and not actually their canonical forms. On top of these vowels, there's also 4 consonants with syllabic pronunciations. And r. If you count those, Loglan has 15 vowels total. With the phonology taken as a whole, we've got another Esperanto-type situation here, where Loglan's phonology isn't fully compatible with any major language. I guess if you count sounds that only appear in loanwords, then it's compatible with German, but if you don't, there's no major language whose speakers will be able to speak Loglan without needing to learn new sounds. But hold on a second, does that even matter? Even if you assume that pronounceability is important for internationality, Loglan isn't really trying super hard to be international. Shouldn't it count as an art lang and therefore be immune to this sort of phonological criticism? Well, this is something I haven't done a great job explaining, but my classification of conlangs into interlangs and artlangs is almost completely arbitrary. Internationality doesn't need to be the primary goal of a conlang for me to count it as an interlang. Loglan claims that its logical nature, quote, would not unsuit it to be an international auxiliary tongue for every man. That means internationality was at least somewhat taken into account when Loglan was designed, and therefore means that I'll be calling it an interlang. Phew. Let's talk about the orthography. Loglan's orthography is logical, but ugly. I had the same problem with Logban. Sure, like it makes logical sense to write sha with C, and then it makes sense to write cha with the letter for ta and the letter for sha. Every step of the process that leads to cha being written with TC makes sense, but it just looks so ugly is the thing. It's even worse with the sounds that were added late in Loglan's development. By the time u, tha, and cha were added, there weren't any good letters left, so they had to be written with the leftovers. The reason these were added was so that scientific classifications of species could be loaned more precisely, which, fun fact, aren't even written phonetically. They're written with a completely separate orthography that's real life actually only used for scientific classifications of species, so like, what's even the point? There's also this weird thing with how consecutive vowels work. Like, every combination of A, E, I, O, and U is allowed in Loglan, but it's inconsistent what it'll actually mean. 4 of them are pronounced as diphthongs, one of which isn't even pronounced the way it's written. 10 of them can be pronounced either as 2 separate vowels or as rising diphthongs, and the rest can only be pronounced as 2 separate vowels. But why? If you're going to have some pairs of vowels that can be either diphthongs or actual consecutive vowels, why even make the distinction? Why not just allow every pair of vowels to be pronounced both ways? Oh, also, this is a phonology thing and not an orthography thing, but hey, why does Loglan allow you to have the same vowel twice in a row? It's not phonemic vowel length because the reference grammar is very clear that it's pronounced as 2 syllables in those cases, and at some point specifically says that you can and should pronounce single vowels long, so what the heck? The Loglan word for 42 is photo. That's not really relevant to the review in any way, but I felt like it had to be said somewhere. You know what else needs to be said? 8 most. That's just 2 random words. Don't know why I said them. Anyway, Loglan's vocabulary was derived with similar but not identical methods as Lojban's. Words are based on English, Mandarin, Hindi, Russian, Spanish, French, Japanese, and German, which at the time Loglan was made were the 8 most commonly spoken languages. Every basic word is meant to sound at least somewhat like its equivalent in most of the source languages. For example, the Loglan word for mother is mamta, which does in fact sound pretty much exactly like the Lojban word for mother, which I used to demonstrate this concept in the Lojban episode. Hold on, I gotta find a different example word. Okay, the word for father is farfu, which does in fact sound like father, fuchin, and fater, and I guess the R makes it kinda similar to padre and père, but it doesn't sound much at all like pita, otec, or otosan. Now, if we look at the Lojban version of this same word, which was derived somewhat more mathematically and therefore should more closely resemble its source languages, we'll see that, oh wow, the Lojban word for father is also farfu. Come on, there's gotta be something that's different. Okay, one of the things I didn't like about Lojban's vocabulary was that some of the words for places aren't derived from endonyms. Like the word for Japanese is ponjo, which sounds very little like Nihon. So in Loglan, which prioritizes endonyms, the word for Japanese is, are you kidding me? It's also ponjo? Ugh, okay, I just gotta find something that's different. This shouldn't be this hard. Lojban is literally just Loglan with different vocabularies, so this should be the easiest part to do. Here, I think I found one. The Loglan word for logic is logji, and the Lojban word for logic is, logji, which is basically the same thing, but harder to pronounce. I guess what I'm saying is that the difference between Lojban and Loglan's core vocabularies isn't very significant. Like, they have roughly the same phonotactics, except Lojban allows more stuff, and more importantly, their words are about equally likely to be familiar to speakers. Zoru and kalma, which both mean walk, are equally unfamiliar to my ear. The grammar of Loglan is more or less the same as Lojban. If there's any significant differences, I didn't notice them. Reading about Loglan grammar felt like reading about Lojban grammar, except things were referred to with slightly more sensible names. As you might know, the types of words in Lojban are called things like fuhivla, tanru, shmavo, and gismu. Normal linguists would call these loanwords, compounds, particles, and verbs. Loglan calls them borrowings, metaphors, little words, and primitives. I don't know why these logical languages are so determined to trick people into thinking that they don't have verbs. Verbs are like the basis of the entire vocabulary. It's okay, you can embrace it. All in all, I'd say that Loglan is to Lojban as Esperanto is to Ido. I know that that comparison might sound super obvious, but it's true. Lojban is an improvement over Loglan, but it's also significantly worse than Loglan in enough ways that it's roughly the same quality overall. That in mind, I'd say that I like Loglan more than I like Igade, but not as much as I like Lojban, making it the 5th best interlang reviewed so far. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, where I'll be reviewing, you know what? Zeisei. Dang, I hope you like that pun, because I'm going to make it so many times in the next episode you have no idea. You know what they say.